Good morning. My name is Kyle Houchins. I am a tech and a trainer for McNeil, and this is Getting Started Rhino for Windows. And we are going to build kind of a fun one today. I ran across this hot rod wagon on Facebook, and I thought it was really cool, so I kind of designed my own. And I was at a car show a couple weekends ago, and I saw a dad dragging their kid around in something like this, and I thought, man, that is really cool. And I was talking to him about it, and he made it himself. There's a couple of companies that do this kind of stuff, and so I kind of went down a rabbit hole on it, and it turns out there's a whole wagon mod subculture, of course, with the hot rod world. There's a subculture for just about every kind of genre of wheeled thing out there, and I am definitely a motorhead. I went to school to be a car designer, and so have spent my entire life either wrenching on or driving or designing or playing with cars in one way or another. So I thought this was kind of fun. We'll use it to talk about some cool stuff like push-pull. And if we can have a little bit of time at the end, maybe we'll throw a little bit of rendering stuff in here. So, if you're new to these sessions, the way that I do these is I either do a sketch the night before, or the morning of, and then I put it away. I don't look at it. I don't practice it. I don't set it up. There's no magic layer where everything is done. We're going to do everything live. If things go well, we'll feel good about ourselves. If things go into the fan, which, depending on how many of these sessions you've seen, you'll know they do occasionally go into the fan. And if they do, then we will talk about what went wrong, how to fix it, and how to recover from that. And hopefully within the mistakes that I make, so you don't have to, we will have some learning in there as well on how to pick up the pieces if something goes haywire on you. So so this sketch is really scruffy, and I tend to kind of not zoom in on the sketches too closely, because the idea is that this is just a communication with myself. This is just me talking to myself saying, what if it's like this? What if it's like that? What if the stance is kind of like this? What if blah, 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 So I'm not going to do a ton of designing in Sketch, because you can lie, cheat, and steal on a sketch. And it's when you get into 3D that you start realizing that, this thing is either going to work or it's not. So I tend not to spend a whole lot of time on this stuff. I tend to just kind of give it an idea. And in this particular case, I was doing some doodling on what the steering linkage looks like. I did a little gesture sketch down here as to kind of how I wanted the stance of the thing. And then just some blocking out massing, kind of like, does it have fat tires, skinny tires, all that kind of stuff. And, where are the relationships of the seat and stuff like that. So we'll take this sketch with a grain of salt, and we're going to design in 3D, which is one of the things I like best about Rhino. If you're new to Rhino and you're thinking that this is going to be a class, sorry to burst your bubble, this is more of a demo, and we are going to move fast and potentially break stuff. So don't try and follow along. You're not going to be able to keep up with me. And watch later in the video, but take notes, ask questions. If I do something that you're confused with, or you're like, wait a minute, whoa, what was that? Hit the chat and ask. I'll definitely stop. And these are intended to be interactive. So if you have questions, hit the chat and ask. They are recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later at your own pace and all that kind of stuff. I do watch the YouTube comments daily, so if you watch the video later and you have a question or a comment on it, you're welcome to ask, and I'll do the best I can to try and point out what we were doing. So for this thing, basically, and because I'm in the US and because I'm old, I'm going to work in Imperial, and I know that for a reference point, the rear rim on this thing is 8 inches in diameter. So I'm going to come in here. Actually, the rear tire is 8 inches in diameter. The rim's smaller. So I'm going to come down here, and I'm just going to scale my sketch so that the rear tire is approximately 8 inches. And you can see that the closer we get to the sketch, the worse it becomes. So I'm going to back it out a little bit. And we'll say that this is approximately kind of our gesture. This is approximately our wheelbase, and then we'll figure out what the track and all that kind of stuff works out to be later. I am gonna go to my material stack in here. By the way, if you don't know how I got this picture in, it's the picture command, and you just browse to the picture that you have and you just drag it into the scene, and you can scale it, rotate it, move it, do all that kind of stuff. You can also delete it, and it will make a material that goes with it. In this case, this is the material that goes with it. If I click on it, it gives me an object transparency slider, and I'm gonna gray this out a little bit just so it's not quite so obnoxious in the modeling window, and it fades to back a little bit. And basically what's going to happen is after I get kind of the basic stance of this thing, I'll probably just shove it off to the side and not even use it for reference, and then we'll just take off in 3D. But so to facilitate that, probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to just stick this on a layer, and I'm going to click the object, right click on the layer, and then change the object layer. And then I can lock it, and I can also hide it if I need to. So when we dump it later, we can go from there. So let's just jump in and start rolling on this. And because I have a circle, I have a center point. Because this is a revolved wheel, I'm gonna assume that this is kind of hot roddy. I've made a bunch of hot rod wheels in my life, so I'm going to take a stab at just designing the profile kind of on the fly. And I'm going to start from a center line like that, and then I'm just going to grab a curve. I'm going to snap it here. I'm going to start kind of drawing up. 1, 2, 3 for a corner. We're going to come out. 1, 2, 3 for a corner. If you don't know what I'm doing, watch the rule of 3 video. I'm going to come out here and add another, and then maybe the final lip on this wheel. And then I'm not going to bother coring it out or anything like that. I'm just going to snap to this point down here and get my smart track on. And we'll do that. So we're going to call that our revolve profile, and then we'll go ahead and draw our tire profile as well. And I'm going to just overlap this a little bit. I'm not going to worry so much about the production value or the production quality of this model, because it's going to be a concept model. And I'm going to come over here, something like this. And so we'll come over something like that. And I'm just going to make this point and this point, I just did off in a straight line because I'm going to trim it and I'm going to flip it and all that kind of stuff so that we can end up with a symmetrical object. So I'm going to grab these. We're going to run a revolve. And we're going to do a full revolve. And that gives us a wheel. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to symmetricalize this. And if we go to wireframe, I'm just going to trim this, and we're just going to mirror it. And that gives us that. And that gives us a fairly okay wheel shape. I'm okay with that. And we'll join these up. Maybe if that ends up looking a little peaky, we can always split that back and then just blend between it. But ideally, we'll have those joined so we can add a material to that, add a material to that. So we'll call that good for now, and that's grown quite a bit. So let's scale it to what it needs to be. And we'll call that about good. And I'm going to just, I'm going to drag, tap Alt. I'm going to make a copy. And then I'm going to scale this down a little bit. And my drawing is a little janky, so I'm not going to worry a whole lot about it, but let's at least get some semblance of a straight line for the ground plane. If you don't know what I did right there, double clicking the gumball on any of the arrows releases it and allows you to relocate it. Double clicking on the seaplane waffle up here allows you to relocate it in 2 dimensions. Double clicking the rotate handle allows you to rotate and relocate it, or double clicking on the center allows you to move it freely in space. There's a setting down here that I always use in Gumball, which is snappy dragging, and that allows it to respect O-snaps, which I have over here, and you'll notice that I have them disabled. And the reason I have them disabled is if you notice me moving this thing around, it's not snapping to anything. However, if I hold down the Alt key, that temporarily enables, notice the disable is off when I hold down Alt, and that allows me to be able to snap this to stuff. So I can snap this to the bottom of this wheel. Once it's snapped, then I can drag the gumball and the object and then snap it to the bottom of the line. So I find that to be very useful. Like, say, for instance, I can snap this to the center. Now I know it's in the center. Okay, so gumball snap, snappy dragging, all that kind of stuff is super useful. And I'm going to get rid of everything except my center line. And then let's adjust the width of this guy a little bit. Make that a little smaller for the front. I do like the kind of comically wide back. I was looking at go-kart, like shifter kart tires, and you can get them comically wide. So we'll go comically wide. I'm going to move this over to play with the track on this, and I'm going to mirror this using history. And updating the children. I'm going to make sure that's on, and then I'm going to mirror this around 0. Helps if I actually mirror this around 0. And then what that allows me to do is that allows me to play with the track on this, and as I adjust that, it will adjust that in real time. And so we'll kind of come something like, let's go to the top view. Let's see. Kind of want the inside of the front tire to relate somehow to the back. And I'm okay with the kind of, really extreme proportions here. We'll adjust that later if it looks like it's going to be a problem. And then the next thing we need to develop is the chassis. So let's do that we'll start somewhere near the center line here. And it looks like my drawing is a little low, but let's come through here. And then because the way that these things are made, the chassis needs to run right through the center line of the rear end, because it's just doesn't have a motor or anything in it. It's just something that gets pulled. So, but the axles do have to have some, we do have to be able to run the axle through the chassis. So now we can do this look at that. Let's fix that. I'm just going to scale this to 0 and flatten it out. And then I'm going to tuck this kind of right in there, and then maybe we'll look at the top view. I don't necessarily love the fact that this is just dead straight, so let's turn the points on for this, hit the F10 key, and let's grab these guys and let's slide them over and do a little hot rod jog in there like that. Kind of narrow the front end a little bit, and that should give us something that looks like that. And I don't love this one, so let's straighten that out. I love Gumball for this type of work because it's so easy to keep yourself oriented and not let things get crazy. And then we have to decide whether we're going to do this out of round tube or whether we're going to do it out of square tube. I think round tube kind of feels Feels pretty hot rod, so let's do that. So I'm just going to pipe it, and I'm going to just eyeball this. I get flamed all the time for doing demos without dimensions on it, but I like to kind of see what stuff looks like best and then go back and add real dimensions to it later, especially when I'm doing a concept, project, which is this, obviously this thing's pretty silly, but it's still fun. So we'll do something like that. And then let's add a couple of pipes across this thing so that it has some structure. I'm going to go just smaller than that. I'm going to drag the extrude handle. I'm going to hold down shift, and you'll notice when I hold down shift, it goes in both directions, and I'm just going to plug that right through the middle of there. Drag, tap alt, and that gives us a very basic chassis that we can then hang this thing on. And then back here, we can draw from the center on this and say this is going to be our center axle. And then same thing, we can draw, hold down the extrude icon in there, and then that gives us our chassis. And then we'll Boolean that out, make a hole for it later. But this gives us kind of our basic setup, and maybe there's some bearing hangers or something like that on that, but we'll worry about that later. All right. So the front end on this thing is one of the more complicated parts. So let's take a look at this. And if I bring this sketch in, you can see that on a typical hot rod front end, there's a front suspension member. It's either straight across, curved, or it has this kind of Z-shaped drop in it. There's a vertical cylinder on the end. Then there's an axle with some pivots on the top of it that allow it to turn, and then there's an arm that sticks out the back, and that connects to the steering linkage that allows you to be able to turn this thing. So let's look at what that might look like, and let's look at it from the front view. And we're just going to start kind of in the center, and I'm going to draw kind of a shape that might kind of feel something like what we're looking for. And one of the things that I see happening a lot when people are getting into Rhino is they worry about stuff way too much. You don't need to worry about stuff so much. You can kind of play, and that's one of the things I like about Rhino a lot, is the fact that we don't need to really get super stressed out about, is this point perfect? Is this surface perfect? Is this line perfect? Is it, like what's going to happen? Because it's flexible, right? You can just kind of smash stuff together and then figure it out later. And my model style tends to be very much find the way along the way. And I find that is super possible in Rhino. So on that point, is it good practice to draw on new layers? Certainly can. You'll notice that I'm a terrible example of that, because I tend to smash everything into one place while I'm thinking about something or while I'm designing something. And then I will organize my thoughts into some sort of semblance of sanity before I send it to a client so that they don't think I'm insane. So a lot of times what I'll do is I will kind of model everything, and as the object tends to start revealing itself, there's some things that will make sense. Like, it makes sense to have the wheels on a layer. It makes sense to have, the chassis on a layer. It makes sense to have the bucket on a layer. It makes sense to have a seat on a layer, all that kind of stuff. And as that stuff kind of reveals itself, then I will, I'll kind of get there. But you do you, whatever makes sense to you. I know I get comments all the time from people who are like, criticizing how I organize my model structure and all that kind of stuff. And that's fine. I get it. Everybody has their own way of doing things, and that's fine. So, so we've got our original curve here, and I'm going to just make this really simple by just dragging it into a surface, and then I'm going to drag that surface into a volume. And that gives us the basis of our kind of drop link thing in here. It's too long. That's fine. Let's refine it a little bit. So let's isolate and let's look at it in this view. And I'm going to pull some ISO curves off of this using the extract ISO curve. And I like this because I know the curves are going to work as far as like a family of shapes kind of thing. I also know that the curves are right on the surface, so I can do push-pull. And push-pull allows me to add this kind of I-beam profile to it. And I can then mirror this entire thing, Boolean it together, and then scale it because it's a little fat. And I get my shape out of a single curve, the gumball, and push-pull. Super quick, super clean, super easy to do. Okay, so let's figure out where this thing actually needs to be. And in this case, the end of it is way too long. So let's isolate again. We'll push-pull the end, and we'll just shorten it. And it didn't like this down here, so I'm just going to delete it and make my life easy. And skin back over that. No problem. Right? Again, I'm not going to worry too much about it. There's two surfaces up here. Fine, delete them. I'm just going to skin over it. Easy. No sweat. Okay, so let's look and see. That is kind of in the right spot, kind of not. It's a little too high. Maybe this needs to go down. Something like that. Which means maybe we need to adjust our chassis rail. And we can do that. It's super easy because we still have the curve. So let's get rid of this and redo it. So let's isolate those. Pick the curve and hit F10. That'll turn your points on. And then we can just, I'm going to set my gumball right to the end of this guy. And I'm going to move it using snappy dragging to the midpoint right there. And that's going to pull all those down. Two-part question. Can you push-pull to a construction plane or line? Does doing all this have a timeline similar to Fusion? No timeline, no history. It's not parametric. Rhino's not parametric. It's a surfacing program. You can add parametrics through Grasshopper, but generally speaking, Rhino itself is not parametric, so you should not expect any type of history timeline to that. Can you push-pull to a construction plane or line? You can push-pull with snaps. So say, for instance, if I wanted to push-pull this end down here, I can snap it to one of those points, and it will snap there, or any object, any line, any surface, anything like that. Anything that an O snap will light up, the push-pull will handle that. Okay, so let's look at our chassis rail again and make sure that it's doing what we want it to do, and I'm pretty okay with that. Let's just sight down it. Ooh, that's kind of droopy. Let's undroopy that. And it's still a little droopy. That's better. All right, we'll pipe this again. It remembered the last setting we used, so I can just blindly click and get what I had before. I'm going to mirror this. And actually, I'm going to finish detailing this first. So let's go to the left. And no hot rod project is complete without adding some go fast holes. So let's do that. I'm going to turn on auto seaplane, and I'm going to shift control click this face. That's going to snap the seaplane to that face, and then everything I draw is going to be not only on that C-plane, but it's going to be on that face as well. And that's going to be important in just a second, because you'll see that we'll use push-pull to make these holes. And let's just, and I could array this, and I could be, you know, I could be, you know, picky about it. But if you've ever been in a hot rod shop, there's very often stuff is just kind of eyeballed, and I'm kind of okay with it. If you look at some of the best hot rods ever made, if you go back and look at Big Daddy Roth's stuff or anything like that, he used chicken wire and plaster. And I'm not saying that that's the right material if you're building a time attack car and you want to set a Nürburgring record, but it looks cool. So, all right, so let's just, this one looks big for that space, so let's just smallify it. That one got small for the space, so let's bigify it. And then I don't really like the spacing on this one, so I'm going to just move it over. And I'm going to kill my history because it's moving stuff on me. So I've got a hotkey set up for history purge, which is the command. And if I wanted this one dead center, there's a neat trick here. If I pick this object to move it, and I select the object to pick the point where I'm going to move it from, it's going to be in the center. The point to move to, if I hit B enter, it's going to ask me for 2 points, and I can snap the centers of those, and it'll drop this right smack in between the two of those. So I'll just use that. And then we'll push pull, and I'm going to pick this face, and I'm going to invert so that I get all of these guys, and then I'm just going to push them through. Boink. And we get a holes. So now we got go fast holes. And this is a little fat still. It feels a little heavy for this. After all, we do have to drag it around by hand. So let's mirror that. I'm going to turn auto C-plane off so I go back to world. Auto C-plane just allows you to be able to snap the C-plane to an object, which is super useful. So that's our front end. Let's go and add the pivots on the ends. And I'm going to snap to there. I'm going to Boolean these two together. I'm going to use the inset command on this face, and I'm going to use a through point, and I'm going to just drag something that looks, and again, you know, if you're doing this for real, you would measure it. I'm not doing this for real, so I'm not measuring it. I'm just having fun. And that's okay. So the next thing we need to design is the pivot, and that I'm going to design with a C channel. So let's just draw something that's got a little bit of clearance. Something like this. And we'll snap it to there. Let's center it kind of off the midpoint of that. So it's kind of centered. Maybe we'll give it a little bit more clearance. Let's offset this. And our corners are going to be sharp. And our distance is, looks like something got screwy here. Oh yeah, there we go. Scale that to 0 and flatten it out. Let's put it back where it's supposed to belong. I was going to say, and something about that offset looked a little funky. That's better. All right, so let's use, I don't know, 1/4 inch is probably too big. something like that. And we're going to cap it with flat caps. And the distance is something like that. And that gives us a C channel. The C channel we can then take and say, well, it's going to be about there. And then we need an arm sticking off the back of it. So something like that. And then if I go to the top view and I say something like this. Actually, let's just do this. Auto seaplane, snap to that. I'm going to just draw something in there. We're going to push pull down to that surface. We're going to snap it. It's going to clip that off like that. And then that gives us our little arm that we need in order to connect the steering linkage to that. We'll put a pin through this. Let's take this curve, and I'm going to just drag gumball, and then I'm going to tap Alt. That's going to break off a curve. I'm going to make that just a little smaller for clearance. This is where layering the wheels would probably help. All right, so let's add some fillets in here. Let's round these corners off a little bit. And we're just going to fillet these edges. And that is a preview, is quite large, so let's do 1/4 inch, and we'll preview it to make sure it does what we want it to do. Maybe, it's too far. All right, that works. So we'll just round those off. Like that. And I'm not going to worry about like filleting everything, just because for speed's sake. So, and this thing, let's mirror this thing over because we did work on one side and I don't want to do the work on the other side. Because I'm lazy, I mean efficient. So we're going to trim this off and we'll just flip this over. And then we'll join these back together. And these two pieces, we'll mirror those over as well. And if we bring everything back, we've got something that kind of feels like it might be suspension-y. Let's look at the wheel versus this. And let's drop a circle right at the center of this. Let's do it in wireframe so we can see. And it looks like we missed the center of our suspension by just a little bit. There are a couple of ways to correct that. The easiest one is just to go, nah. Now it's centered. And since we fixed that one, we should delete this one and mirror that one over. Like I said, it's fun when you don't have to like get crazy about it, right? You can always go back and straighten this kind of stuff out later. It's not a big deal. But just getting the original concept out is really important. And one of the things that I love about Rhino is it gives you this ability to be able to kind of hack and slash things together and then go back with an extraordinary amount of precision and refine. And that, I think, is a pretty powerful thing. So let's make this shift control click, and then I'm just dragging a face, and then I'm going to inset through point. And we'll say something like that. And that just gives us the shoulder, push, pull, and then we'll put a nut on it. And let's auto seaplane. Stick it right here. And we'll do a nut. And we're just going to extrude that. And if I was doing this for real, I would go to, like, if you're in the United States, there's a website called McMaster Car, and you might be able to get that internationally as well. But there's a website called McMaster Car where you can actually download parts, and that's exactly where I would get all of this stuff so that I had actual, you know, M whatever hardware to build with. So if I was actually doing this for real, I would go through and I would actually download the parts, download actual threads and all that kind of stuff, and I would actually build this, you know, with real mechanical stuff. I'm going to steal this for back here. This isn't something that's going to turn, but I'm going to steal it because I want an axle back here for appearance sake, like that, just so it looks like it's got one. Shh, don't tell. Nobody will ever know unless they watch the video or sit through this demo. All right, so we've got the basic chassis. We need a plate for our steering arm to sit on. So let's do this with a center square. We're going to do it with a rectangle, and I'm going to round it. So let's go something like that. Feels about right. And then I'm going to shift control drag the front part of this and delete it and replace that with a straight section, join it up, and then maybe I'll fillet those edges just so they're not so big, but I wanted it to have a little bit more of a shape like that as opposed to roundy on both sides. So let's take that and we're going to stick it to the top of this. One nice thing about gumball, especially with planar curves, is the gumball sits in the bounding box center of the object, so you know it's centered with the curve, which means if I drag it straight down and snap it to the midpoint of here, I know that it sits right on top of that. So now I can just drag this, add some thickness to it, make it an object. Maybe I'll poke it down just a hair, and maybe if we're being really fussy, we design a little gusset in here. Something like that. And maybe we do another one back here. Just, you know, for when we're dragging our kid at 220 miles an hour at Daytona, their suspension doesn't come loose. So we'll do that. Boolean all this together. And again, we can always go back and add fillets and all that kind of stuff at a later date. I'm going to steal this plate, shift control click, drag straight up, tap alt, let go. Then you get a copy of it. I'm going to scale it down just a hair so that there's a slight difference. Stick it to the top of this. Move it just a hair above that and then extrude to get a plate like that. And actually, I think I went the wrong way. I think this needs to be bigger, actually, like that. And then what we need to do, it looks like that's smashing into our wheel. So let's shift control click that to auto seaplane it. And let's draw a curve right there. And then we're going to push pull and just knock the end of that off. And we'll re-roundy that. There we go. And because we mirrored that with history, when we changed it, it changed the other one as well. So the last thing we need to do is add some little pivots on here. So as far as to complete our suspension, and then we get to work on a little bit more fun stuff. I don't know, this stuff's all fun. I enjoy it. I'm going to stick this to the center, move it there, shift control, assume that that's some kind of linkage of some sort. I'm going to steal this, stick it over here. Let's move it to the center, move it up, move it somewhere kind of back in like that. And then there needs to be a secondary linkage, so I'm going to drag this, copy it, rotate 90, and I know that that sticks into the end of that. I'm going to make that a slightly smaller thing, and then I'm going to shift control click this face and I'm going to shut off auto seaplane now, shift control that face, and I'm just going to drag it to make it much longer, so that it kind of meets the center point of that. And then I will stab gumball down here, go to wireframe, and I'm just going to aim it to the center of this thing. And that gives us, it looks like it, whoa, it even clears and everything. Look at that. And we can clean this up later. You know, I would probably download like a Heim joint or something like that from McMaster. And actually, you know, if I was gonna make something that was, you know, really truly accurate, I would download the actual, you know, actual mechanical pieces and assemble that in a way that actually made sense. But in this case, you know, for what we're doing, it's plenty. I changed gumball from seaplane to object because my object was no longer aligned to the seaplane, and I wanted it to extrude straight down the object instead of down the seaplane world. So you can adjust gumball in here, align it to a seaplane, to the object, to the world, or to view, depending on your needs. So let's mirror this. And now we've got something like that. We need to add a pivot here. Drag, tap, alt. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger one. Like that. And then this would probably have a bolt on it, so let's steal this since we already made it. And I'm going to grab this seaplane waffle and I'm going to stick this to the center of that object. It's probably a little fat. Let's thin that up a little bit. And then we'll call that the nut, and we'll call this the bolt end. And so we'll poke this up in there. And again, if I was doing this for real, I would actually download nuts and bolts, and I would use real ones with real threads and all that kind of stuff. Let's put, technically for cars, you're not supposed to have steering suspension parts that can drop out from the bottom. The bolts are supposed to drop in from the top, so that if the nut falls off, the suspension doesn't fall apart, but going to live dangerously. It'll give something to yell at. Give people something to yell at me on YouTube about. Because apparently that is a favorite hobby among some people. I can take it. It's fine. I always, anytime somebody goes after me on YouTube, I'm like, well, you know, you get what you pay for. The videos are free. We don't charge anything for the videos, so your expectations should be pretty low. Yep, exactly. That's all right. I'm having fun. Hopefully a few other people have fun. That's fine. All right, let's get this lined up. Find the center of that guy. There it is. I always love it. I did an eyewear demo a while ago, and oh my God, the eyewear people, that's a serious group of folks. They were very upset that my optics weren't correct, and it's the funniest part of it is I started the video by saying, you know, I'm not an eyewear designer, so don't come after me about the optics. And the very first comment was like, your optics are all screwed up. I'm like, you didn't really watch the video, did you? It's the very first thing I said. All right, so we've got that, and then the next thing we need to add to this is the handle. And the handle on this actually hangs off the front of this, and we might need to extend this. So let's do push-pull. Let's pull this out a little bit, like that. And then let's add a pivot to that. This kind of stuff, by the way, like 5 years ago, I would have never in a million years ever tried to pull this demo off in an hour. I would have just never done it. It just would have been, you know, it would have, the hubris of trying to do something like that would have just been astounding. These days, with the tools that we have available in Rhino, this kind of stuff is actually kind of easy to pull off. And so I actually have no, I mean, what are we? We're at 9:49 right now, and we're actually very close to being done because the bucket and stuff is pretty easy. So let's do the handle shapes. That's cool. You say thank you. So let's do something like this. And by all means, if this gets long and you need to bail, you won't hurt my feelings. You can always just catch up on the recording later. So don't worry about that. I'm going to use a tool called Curve Boolean, and that allows me to click outside of something and then just combine a bunch of stuff into one thing. So that gives me that shape. We're going to do that for like this. Mirror this off the center. And then I'm going to extract an ISO curve. Like that. Push-pull. The trick with push-pull is it has to be on the surface, and it has to really be on the surface. It can't be kind of halfway on the surface. It has to be on the surface. So the auto seaplane is super useful for that. All right, so that is our handle, and if we set this in the center, then we can see, maybe we position it something like that. And let's draw auto C-plane, snap that there, draw something at 0, which gives us that. Oops. And I can then extrude that up a little bit, which gives us the basis for our handle. And then maybe what I'm going to do is copy that and stick it right on top like that. And then let's make this long. And then just for the heck of it, I'm going to use a bend deformer. And I'm going to bend this for some hot rod speed. And then delete those two. And I might even just go from loft from here to here just to create that last little bit. Join that up. And let's build a handle for the top of it. I'm going to do that with a circle. I'm going to change the degree on this to 3 deformable yes. And then I'm going to just change the shape of this thing by dragging some points. And then we will extrude that like that. I'm going to rotate it so that it's fairly parallel. We'll stuff it on the end. And then let's inset. And we'll do a through point, and we'll kind of determine what our wall thickness needs to be. And let's do loose on, something like that. And I don't love what's going to go on right here, so that's fine. We'll manage that. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is probably just cut this off. Actually, I'll just use this curve. Tap Alt. And then this has got a cutter on it. If I drag this through, it's going to split that into 2 pieces. Let's move it a little bit this way. Like that. And then let's fillet these edges. Maybe a little bigger. Like that. And then let's go in the center. Draw something kind of like that. And then we're going to just drag the extruder over to make a handle. And then I want to add a little bit of puff to this. So I'm going to explode it. And I'm going to change degree on this to make it degree 3 deformable yes. And that's going to give me points that I can then grab this and then just shift drag scale these. And I get a little puffy shape in there. And that makes it a little more handly and a little less cylindery, if that's a thing. Something like that. All right, now that is most of our stuff done. And if we look at this in rendered mode, you can see that we've got our main kind of layout done. So it seems like the hard thing would be the bucket, but the bucket is actually the easiest thing. Because essentially what we're going to do is I'm going to draw a rounded square shape. And I'm going to start, looks like our, there we go. Looks like our center line is back here, but that's fine. So I'm going to start this at 0, and we're going to come out and draw kind of our bucket shape. Notice I'm using 3 points for the corners. And that's nice and flat. Let's just see if it's anywhere near the size we want. I'm going to actually modify this to follow the shape that I want. I'm going to hit F10 to turn points on. I want this to have a little bit of an S shape, like a little, you know, kind of something going on like that. And then I'm going to take this same curve. I'm going to go to the top view, and I'm going to copy paste, and I'm going to shift drag and scale it and make it smaller. And let's stick that to the end and stick that to the end. And then I'm going to take this and flatten it and drop it down here where our chassis goes, like that. And it looks like we need to smallify it a little bit like that. And then maybe a little wider. Like, that should kind of go there. And this should kind of go there. And this is where, you know, every time I have a conversation with somebody who uses SolidWorks or something like that, they're like, where's your datum planes? I'm like, I don't care. I want it to look cool. And so, and that's where I'm at right now in this project, is I want to define a look. I want to define a style. I don't want to have to worry about all of the stuff that I have to worry about when I'm setting up something as a parametric model. And so Rhino gives me the ability to be able to do that, and in a very kind of freestyle, you know, fly by the seat of your pants kind of thing. And the cool thing is you can always go back and tighten it up. You can always go back and do the stuff that you need to do. And gumball set to object. Let's set it to world. And then we're going to just add a little bit of shape to this thing in both directions. Okay. And we'll mirror it, join it, cap it, which closes off the bottom. And it looks like we've got, before I do that, looks like I've got some continuity issues here. Let's fix those. So let's grab all of these, need to be flat to one another. Nope, not like that. These three need to be flat to one another. Okay, so those are good. And these are good. And the way that I can tell that they're good, there's no scale handle. See how there's no scale handle? These guys, on the other hand, see how there's a scale handle right there? I'm going to scale those so that they're flat, and my continuity issue is going to go away. And if you don't know what I'm talking about as far as continuity issues, tangency is defined by the 0 point, the G1, and the G2 point. And if the G0 and G1 are lined up on both sides of a joint, it's tangent. If the G0, G1, and G2 are lined up on both sides of a joint, then technically speaking, it's curvature. There's some nuances as far as curvature is concerned, but generally speaking, that's the kind of the technical definition of tangency and curvature. So now we got rid of that. We got rid of that little. This is what we had before, right? So we just took that out by lining up those 3 points on all 3 rows, and so now it's gone. You can see that the highlight tracks really nicely. Let's check the back as well, because it's probably in the same boat. So that scale handle means that these points are not lined up. So if I scale them to 0, now they're lined up. See how this one's poking in like that? If there's no scale handle, then there's nothing to scale, because that means they're in a straight line. So that's a good indication, visual indication of what's going on. See how that shape is gone now? Because across the center line, there's a really common problem, right? We either get a fin like that, or we get a booty like that, and we don't want either. And the way to avoid that is to make sure that your G0 and your G1, G0, G1 are lined up across the point. These are a straight line. If we look at this here, you can see these are all in a straight line. As long as that's in a straight line, that's tangent, right? If we grab all these and we move them in, that's still tangent, that's still tangent, as long as they're in a straight line, okay? So ideally you want all that stuff straight, and then your center line is going to be nice and clean. Let's give this guy just a tiny bit of shape, like that. I actually want these out a little bit. I hate that. Let's not do that. All right, and then let's put our floor back in. Let's join that. That's what I love about doing stuff like this, because it's you get to see it for real, you know, and you get to see whether or not it's going to work or not. And when it doesn't work, then you just undo it. Let's preview this. Get a nice fillet around the bottom of that. That's a surface blend. That's an edge blend instead of a fillet. If there's a right click, left click on this. Left click is fillet edges. That's a round ball fillet. Right click is blend edges. That's a continuity blend. So that's actually a G1 or G2 fillet, depending on how you have it set. So let's do the next part, which is let's copy paste this. Now, copy paste is not an offset. Copy paste is a cheat, and I'm all for it, because all I need is for this to look good for a demo or a concept model. So I'm not gonna kill myself over it. I'm gonna add a little lip to this thing. Now, when it comes down to the point where it's a production piece, yes, I'm going to worry about that. When I'm playing and I'm having fun and I'm trying to come up with something cool, I am not going to worry about that. I could worry about it if I'm that type of person, but I'm just not. So, spent way too much time worried about stuff in my life. I'm not going to do it anymore. And I'm just going to run this around. And we'll call that good. And the whole thing's a little fat, so let's join all of this up and then do some scaling so that it works with our model. So let's scale this in a little bit, like that. And then we can call that good. That feels... It's just a hair high, so let's sit it right down on those rails. It's getting cool. Let's knock the corners off of this while we're looking at it. When the preview on the fillet is red, the fillet's going to fail. So see how it's red? Once it turns white, then that's telling you that the preview is going to work. All right, so let's build our hot rod seat. We're getting... Where are we? We're 10:06. All right. A little long, but we're almost there. So this seat is a very complicated shape, actually, if you try and model it implicitly. So we're not going to do that. We're going to cheat, and that's fine. We're going to massively overbuild this thing, and we're going to then sweep that and then trim it. So if I take this and good Lord, flatten that out, and I'm going to sit it right kind of where that needs to be, and I'm going to align it kind of in the direction it needs to go. And then I'm going to draw a shape that gives me way more than what I asked for. And then I'm going to sweep it with a one rail sweep. And if it crosses up in the corner, which it did, that's fine, because because this is a single surface, right? I'm going to turn its points on, and it's simple. It's a simple surface. There's a command called move UVN, and it brings up this little dialog box, and I'm going to grab these points. Let's see. I want to grab these guys are the ones. You want to find the ones that are just tangled up. And I'm going to smooth these in the U, and check that out. It just unties them. So just because you asked Rhino to do something and Rhino basically dropped it on the floor and stood on it and then handed it to you and said, here you go, doesn't mean you have to accept those results. You can always go back and mess with the points on stuff. So let's mirror this. And we should be tangent across the center line and all that kind of stuff. And let's bring our part back and let's scale this in like that. And if I explode this, I want the back to come in just a little bit. So let's turn those points on and let's grab these. I'm going to hide the curve. We're almost out of here, so thanks for hanging in. Want that to come in just a little bit like that. And then we just need to trim our seat shape. So we've got way more stuff than we need here. So I'm just going to come in here and trim that. And Viola. We have a seat. Let's put some hot rod holes in it, because hot rod. Actually, we probably could get away with, let's try a solid offset and make this have some thickness. We'll do it at 1/4 inch, something or other. Sharp corners, we do want it solid. And it looks like it did it. That's fine. We'll take that. If we wanted the edges to be soft, we can come in here and delete the cap that it made. And we can use a blend surf. Chain. Ooh, that's ugly. This is where my copy paste trick might work better than offset, but let's clean up that edge. All right, whatever. Chain. Stop it. There we go. There's a little teeny edge in here that I need to get. I should probably fix that, and I probably would if I was doing something for real, but I'm not going to worry a whole lot about it. And it looks like there might be another little doigget of an edge down here that's not good. So let's tell you what, this is fighting me. So let's do this. Let's do copy paste. The nice thing about copy paste is the stuff is the same parameterization that you want. And so you can end up getting thicknesses on things without getting a lot of additional points. And again, it's not an offset, so you have to be, you have to be cognizant of what you're doing. But because the stuff all matches up, it tends to blend a little nicer. All right, so let's put our hot rod holes in here, and then we'll throw a seat pad in, and then we'll be ready to call it a day. That one should be smaller. That one should be smaller still. Adam Savage did a great video he took an aluminum Navy chair, and he drilled as many holes through it as he possibly could without it making it fall apart to lighten it. I think he took like 3.5 pounds out of this chair. It's pretty amazing. But it's a fun video to watch. Let's take and Boolean subtract all that stuff. And that gives us our holes. And then let's put a seat pad in here. I'm using the isolate command, by the way, to hide things. And we'll do seat cushions. I like doing seat cushions in sub D because they're easy. So let's center it. And we're just going to do that. Look at that, instant cushion. Ta-da! No talent necessary. There we go. Make sure that doesn't poke through. Control shift selecting those vertices to make sure that they don't poke through. And if I was gonna get crazy with this, I would very likely go in and add some detail to this so that it has like wrinkles in the corners, and I would probably add like some stitching and some stuff like that. But I think I've tortured you guys enough for today, so let's wrap it. Unless you're like, yay, let's make a 4-hour video. No, let's not make a 4-hour video. All right, so let's hide our stuff, and let's see what kind of nonsense we've made here. All right, so we've got our thing in here. Let's hide our drawing. And let's just add a few little materials. And we could say maybe, and because we haven't Boolean this stuff together yet, maybe the chassis needs to hug in tighter. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe we need to add some ribs to the floor. Maybe this needs to be longer, shorter, taller, fatter, whatever. We can play with it because now we can start finessing and designing and things like that because we've got all our elements made. But let's throw a few materials on it just because it's fun, and then I will let you go forth and make great stuff. All right, so let's do this. Wagon's got to be red, right? In the history of ever, has there been a wagon that's other than red? I am going to make, let's hide this, and hide this, and let's make everything black, because that's easy. And then we'll get, let's grab a wood for the handle. And then let's do the wheels. A metal. Take the polish down a little bit. This stuff, we'll probably do a different metal. I like to try and like think about telling a story, you know, with when you're doing a render. Like, what's the stuff actually made out of? Does the mechanism actually do what it, you know, is it feasible? You know, that kind of stuff. And to give it some visual interest, like this is a different metal than that. And these would probably be a different metal than, you know, that. And this would be a different black. So let's do a different black. We'll leave the reflectivity high, but the clarity low. And what that'll do is that'll give us a little bit of a sheen, like that. And then maybe this handle is fancy. Maybe it's chrome instead of painted, like that. And then the seat's probably going to be in aluminum. So let's grab another one. And probably not going to be polished, so let's knock that down a little bit. And then I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I may have a leather somewhere. Don't have one handy. I thought I had a substance leather somewhere, but let's see. I think there's a leather in the... Well, I'll tell you what. Let's do a plastic. And we'll do a brown. That's not very brown, is it? Let's do something like that. Let's brown that up a little bit. And we'll assign that to these guys. And we're going to drop the clarity, and then we'll add a leather texture to it. And we'll throw the automotive environment in here. Make this the... And we'll throw a little ray trace on there. Yikes! The leather has gone insane. Let's make that extra small. Whoa! Let's make it extra, extra, extra small. There we go. That's better. And that's still a little crazy, but that's all right. I like to change the camera to 35 for this stuff. Gives it a little bit more perspective. And then if we had a background or something like that, we could even do something fun like put some focal blur on here. And we're going to set the focal blur to the closest thing, which is kind of that. And then the f-stop, let's do 24. Oop, not that much. Let's do 80. There we go. Just blur out the background just a hair, maybe even a little less. That way, just so that one's fuzzing out just a little bit. And that gives us a quick little render. Now, from this point, I would do a lot more detailing. I would get into the tires. I'd add some material to that. I'd add some graphics to the side of this. I'd probably add some seat belts or, you know, and I would go in and get real hardware, and I would add the valve stems and all that kind of stuff. But at an hour 20, I think we should probably wrap it. Otherwise, this is going to turn into us hanging out all day, and that's cool. You guys are cool. I like hanging out with you. But I think we should probably wrap it so that it doesn't turn into something that's too crazy long. But anyway, any questions on anything that we saw so far? Fabulous. Okay. Well, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate it. My name's Kyle Houchins. I'm a tech and a trainer from McNeil. This was Getting Started Rhino for Windows. Go make great stuff. Thanks. Bye.